we go to on blue badge fraud, we take those up to prosecutors, so they're at quite a low level. But it depends on what the value is. Hard to judge on what the value is and what use they've made of that card. So it's not always the value of the crime that's stopping us. It depends on the type of fraud that they've committed.
Do you want to speak?
Yes.
You wanted to add something in relation to John's question?
It was, yes.
Forgive me, I didn't realise you were.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose it was just to highlight that we have a separate whistleblowing policy which sets out protection of our whistleblowers, and then also to draw attention to the fact that we wouldn't necessarily know something was malicious until it was investigated. So we make sure we investigate everything, and then we can determine whether it's due to be malicious, or it may throw up some things which still may need to be investigated, even if it was the malicious complaint or whistleblower in the first place.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the prosecution, obviously this is quite reactive, but in terms of sort of, say, the blue badge holder situation, how do we sort of filter things that have gone wrong to sort of make a public sort of display afterwards to prevent people doing it again? Is there sort of like opportunities to name and shame? Is there sort of okay, 31. The chair has just pointed me to page 31. Okay, that will answer that question. Second point, coming back onto that £10,000 case involving significant large. If there's individuals that have got small amounts, but in aggregate comes to the 10,000 or more, I presume they are investigated for the entire individual cases of fraud.
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Multiple incidents of fraud that aggregates.
Oh.
When you add them all up.
Same person.
Same person.
Oh,
yes.
yes,
Same
yes.
person. Yeah.
Yeah, if it's we would consider. So each case, it's pulled together. If it was an employee, we'd obviously always discipline, and then any case we investigate, whether it's a resident or an employee, we put an evidence pack together, and we'd always consider. So we may run it past legal to decide whether it's worth prosecuting, or may if it's take it to the police if it's a different type of fraud. So we'd have to go through all the evidence, whether we think there's enough there to go to take it to prosecution. Yeah.
Could you give some background information on how you decided for the limit to be, or threshold to be £10,000?
I haven't, well, it's only to be consistent with the other partners, we've just, that's the level that's been set. My view is it wouldn't be, it's not a rigid amount, it's just an indicator. So if you had something that was 9,000, it's not saying it wouldn't be considered. I think it's just giving an example of a large fraud, but it's not really taking as set, I think. But yeah.
I mean, I found this a very clear report. There was one question I had on page 21, paragraph 45. It says the council will undertake private prosecutions. With what frequency have we undertaken private prosecutions?
We haven't done, well, we do the blue badge through legal, and we've got another large case that's going through legal at the moment. It's an ex-employee, so we haven't got. We've had a few employee ones that have gone through, but the main ones that go through the blue badge, I think I've had prosecutions. Well,
so every prosecution the council carries out is a private prosecution.
We actually do the prosecution.
So we do the prosecution as a separate body to the police. CPS. So we're guided by the same factors in public interest and evidence base that the police would make a decision on, the CPS would. So we as Margaret talked about, if we have really good evidence of someone who's committed fraud against us, an employee or member of the public, for £5,000, well, if there were aggravating factors, or if we consider that the prosecution was the right thing to do, the council would carry out private prosecution to do that. But every prosecution the council does is a private prosecution.
So just to follow up on that, does that mean that if we report a matter to the police and they consider it a matter that warrants prosecution as a criminal matter, we still do the prosecution?
Not necessarily, no. The police can take prosecutions for fraud on, and they have much greater powers than we do actually to investigate. So if we considered that a case needed us to speak to the police, to hand over to the police, then they might take it forward in their own volition. It works the other way as well, though. It's something that we would consider very serious. The police might fall below their thresholds for the resources.
Thank you. On page 25 and 26, under local authority caution and also administrative penalties, where it says involves offence is minor, how does the council decide what's minor? Is there a set threshold or a set list? Or is it just subjective down to the person who's dealing with the case?
Well, the admin penalty on that page, it lists the things, so they've never offended, or there's various criteria. Is that what you're saying? The offence is minor? Oh, yeah. Okay. It's usually because it's a small amount, or it's not happened for long, or there's maybe a reason that we'd accept.
So is the decision based on a very subjective kind of viewpoint when it's decided on that?
It's a judgment, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's not subjective in the sense, though, there's a CPS code for considering whether to prosecute or not.
Okay.
And it might well be considered applying those factors that a preferred course of action would be a caution rather than a full prosecution.
Okay.
So, for example, you might have a vulnerable adult that had carried out or committed a crime that wasn't particularly serious, but it was felt some form of action should be taken.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? In one case. So can we approve the revised anti-fraud and anti-corruption standard? Item 5 is local government ethical standards review by the Committee on Standards in Public Life, and Paul, you're going to introduce that.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. This is, members will recall, in July they considered a report with 15 best practice recommendations, and we sought to evaluate whether or not Merton's scheme for complaints complied, I guess, with the 15 best practice recommendations. There were 4 areas where we felt we could take a bit more action to bring us up to all those 15 standards, and this is the paper that sets out the recommendations for members to consider whether or not we do or don't want to do those. I've set them out in the paper in the 4 sections. The first one is at the bottom of page 33, where the recommendation was to incorporate definitions of bullying and harassment with examples. The paper there sets out that the Merton Council's Code of Conduct incorporates the Member Officer Protocol, and the Member Officer Protocol at the moment has that definition of bullying harassment at paragraph 3.4 in the report. What the Member Officer Protocol doesn't have is examples. At paragraph 3.5, there is quoted there the ACAS definition of examples for bullying harassment to be considered by employers. The recommendation is that those examples are nationally recognised, that they give it a good indication of the sorts of behaviours that would be considered or might be considered bullying harassment, and the recommendation is that they are incorporated into the Member Officer Protocol so that we can use those to guess, to assist us in not going out looking or asking the Court of Judge if someone is. The next recommendation was that codes of conduct should incorporate a provision that members should comply with formal standards investigations. And the suggestion to do that is that, again, in the member officer protocol, which is incorporated into the code of conduct, there is a section which sets out the behaviours that are expected of officers by members, but also what is expected by members from officers. And it seems the most straightforward thing to do is to include a paragraph 4.3, compliance with any formal standards of investigation is what's expected by members. And if members didn't do that, then that in itself could be taken forward as a breach of the protocol and code of conduct. The next one was a recommendation that the code of conduct should be annually reviewed. The code that Merton has in place at the moment is the local government associations model code from 2011. It's quite a thin code. Some councils have much more detailed codes, but it's the model code as was recommended at the time. It is likely over the next year, 2-3 years, the LGA will issue a new model code, which this committee will want to consider. So the recommendation is until then, a report is brought to yourselves in September with a review of the code and whether or not there are any suggested changes that need to be making. It's also suggested that in the run-up to that review, we invite members of the public and organisations, probably through the council's website, for a period of months, whether or not they've got anything they'd like to draw to members' attention for that review. The last recommendation was in relation to separate bodies, and the recommendation was the council should report on separate bodies that the council set up, which they own, as part of their annual governance statement. As luck would have it, because Margaret and her colleagues are very up to date with these recommendations, in the council's annual governance statement for this year that the committee approved in July, I've set out paragraph 6.3 there, the wording from the annual governance statement which had adopted that recommendation. And it goes down to paragraph 6.6. So the annual governance statement sets out the arrangements for the two companies the council has, which is Chas 2013 Limited and also Merton Developments. So in terms of the recommendation, I think the council, because that's been incorporated now, complies with the best practice recommendation. In the following paragraphs, just because members raised at their previous meeting other organisations, if you like, whether they be shared services like the legal shared service or the audit shared service, and also the South London Waste Partnership was mentioned as well. So for members' information, I've set out there the oversight of those three shared services. The audit partnership is actually run by Wanson Richmond. You're well used to seeing Margaret reporting to yourselves, and Margaret, as the auditor, was the head of internal audit, reports to this committee in terms of the running of the shared service partnership. The South London Legal Partnership reports through to a governance board and to Mark Allison as responsible cabinet member. It's suggested that, and actually it's because I think this is a good idea, but it is suggested if there is, members feel it would be useful to have more visibility of these shared services, suggested that would be appropriately done through, if the scrutiny panels wanted to do it, through an annual report to the scrutiny panel for that accountability on the executive and their running of the service. And then the last one was a regulatory service partnership, which is hosted by Merton, which has a joint committee that runs it, so it has that member oversight at joint committee level. Sorry, just to confirm, the South London Waste Partnership is also run by a joint committee, so members are entitled to see the reports and various information that goes to the joint committee to run that partnership. If any members have got any questions, I'll do my best to answer.
Thank you. Any questions?
Chair,
Mary?
just I'd like to ask Paul, when you seek the views of the public, and it's all done on the internet, on the website, and I feel there's a section of our community that's missed out there, because a lot of the older generation are not on computers, and so is there any other way they can? Is there any other way you can reach those people?
Can I just interject there? Because I think when we were at the health scrutiny and we had the representatives of St George's Hospital, was it last week?
Yeah.
I think you referred to the fact that you organised a poll amongst the members of Friends in St Helier to get their opinions on the hospital, and I think there's nothing to stop any of the voluntary organisations that are helping, supporting, assisting that group of people in the community for doing something like that. I commend Fish for doing it, and would encourage you to kind of, by all means, do a survey, ask them to fill in paper forms, and or report back of yourselves having done something like that.
Will I be able to assess some forms so as I can give each member of 272 people, get their opinion?
I think what we can do is, if we are going to timetable it for next September, I think it'd be useful for...
There's something on the website.
Yes, yeah. So I'm just thinking we'll do it best, and I think it's a point well made. Because I guess there's the issue about it being proportionate, if you like, the extent to which we want to carry out that consultation. I would suggest we speak to the council's consultation team just to see how we can most effectively do that, and build in those kind of access channels for people who don't use the intranet as well as the rest of us. And also, actually, we could make sure members are happy with the proposal at the July meeting next year, just to pick that up and reassure members that we're doing what we need to do in terms of that reaching people.
Thank you.
I suppose I just wanted to draw attention, depending on the timing of it and how long lead-in that we have, we could also put something in mind, Merton, around the types of things that we're looking to do, and then enable people to contact either the councillors if they have views on this. I suppose this is something that we wouldn't necessarily expect a lot of views on, but I may be very wrong in that. But certainly we're exploring how we make sure that we touch with other wider consultations, everyone that we can, to make sure their opinions are taken on board.
Plus the fact it makes them feel valued as well.
I must say that when we had the clinical director of St George's up before the health scrutiny panel, I think it was quite nice for them to get some complimentary feedback, because when you're running a hospital of that on that scale, you must get your fair share of criticisms and things that go wrong, and it was really nice to pass on those few compliments from your members, and I think it kind of redressed some of the balance of the discussion that we were having, because inevitably we tend to focus on the things that aren't going so well, and it is important with people that are running public services that we give them the pat on the back as well as the kick up the backside when they need it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Well, in that case, can the committee agree to the recommendations set out in paragraph 2.1? Item 6 is the regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. I'll put you down for a question, John. I think I can predict what it might be. I think Paul can as well. But over to you, Paul, to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. Members will recognise the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, which is to oversee the exercise of the Council's covert surveillance powers, to make sure they're not being used in an overzealous manner. The report says that there has been one request for the use of directed surveillance since March 2019. It was due to take place in August. I'm afraid I've not got an update on that, but my understanding was it was a test purchase case. there have been no requests for CCTV footage or communication footage. I can let members know that in terms of just because the council isn't using RIPA doesn't mean to say the council isn't carrying out enforcement activity. And since 1st of March, we have carried out 139 littering prosecutions. We've just received 38 fresh cases. I've got to say Merton is, other boroughs do about 5. So Merton is on a high volume trajectory at the moment. There haven't been any other waste cases. I know that members are very keen in particular about fly tipping, and I think the previous report we had some covert surveillance in relation to fly tipping, and a number of prosecutions have been successfully carried out, but I haven't got any report to report at this meeting.
Yeah, it's true. It's a matter about fly tipping in my whole craving. I mean, I was coming from Mass on Sunday and I walked up the road and I saw a huge fly tip. I went up in search of this and I made name and address. And it come out of the major house, there was 4 people joined me. And they were mad. He said, why don't you set up cameras? And if you prosecute anybody else, why don't we know about it? You don't publicize it, so nobody knows that you prosecute people. And this is, it's very troubling in my area. The fly tips falling everywhere. I reported one to enforcement today. I managed to get a name and address from the rubbish. I passed it on. So I hope that I will prosecute someone and let people know about it. Because people don't think we are doing anything about it. Because it's there all the time. It's pretty bad.
We did at the last meeting, I took members' concerns back, particularly on the publicity. And I was assured that we do publicise it. I think we actually even put it in my Merton last time round. I think I'll double check on that and make sure members are aware of that. So it's not that officers aren't wanting to do that and aren't doing it on some occasions, but I think we all agree that we'd like to see far more.
I have to say that some of the fly tippers are really considerate because recently I saw in my ward a chair that had been left out for somebody if they got tired or if they were really. The bid for the auction item has been accepted.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, on point 2.6, so it highlights that there was one request for directed surveillance of a business which is due to take place in late August. So I presume that's happened. And in terms of direct surveillance, is that sort of someone following them around, or is it CCTV? And what sort of criteria do a business sort of have to meet in order to get this service?
This will be direct surveillance of a business, I think, will be a CHIS application. CHIS stands for Covert Human Intelligence Source, which is actually a child purchase of. It will be for knives or for glue or for tobacco or alcohol. So it's not, they're not followed around, but it's an authorisation to do it covertly. So the business will not know the child is working in prosecution services.
I have to say that my children are all grown up now, so they're too old to assist the council, but when they were young enough, they were regularly, all of them were involved in making test purchases of the kind of products that Paul has described in an effort to actually deal with that tiny minority of businesses that kind of let the rest of them down by offering goods to youngsters that shouldn't be provided. And I think they enjoyed themselves, the opportunity to sort of be a secret agent. And I think there were burglars involved at the end of the day as well, so they always kind of came home very happy. And indeed, it led to my oldest daughter, I don't know if it directly influenced her career, but she's now a prosecutor with the CPS. She's locking up the bad guys on a regular basis.
Thanks, Chair. You said there was no request for CCTV footage for things like fly tipping. Am I correct in saying that?
This will be, I think, requested by the police or enforcement for the council CCTV footage that it has on its cameras. I think that's what that
So this does not include a councillor requesting for CCTV footage?
No, it doesn't. What these are is if the council wants to use covert footage or to direct its CCTV cameras to carry out covert surveillance, it needs to make an application to the magistrate's court to authorise that, because it captures other people. It might infringe people's privacy, for example. So there's strict rules around how the council can carry out covert intelligence. So this is if the council wants to do it covertly, we need to request it off the magistrate's court.
How long is this process before the council will actually do that? Because I'm thinking of lots of examples where residents have been literally begging me, let's get some CCTV footage here, this constantly flighting, particularly in the private areas in our ward. How much further do they have to go before there is any evidence from CCTV that will really help those prosecutions in those particular circumstances?
So it is quite possible that CCTV footage has been used to do a number of prosecutions. This is covert surveillance. So if you have a CCTV camera, it's not covert. You don't need to ask permission for that. It's actually putting a secret camera in to do things secretly, so you wouldn't know it was there. And that's why you need the magistrate's court to give that permission, because otherwise, there were cases in the past where councils covertly surveyed parents, whether they did or didn't, whether the address they said they lived at to mean a child could go to a particular school, and that was seen as overbearing use by a council of covert surveillance. So this is a strict regime to make sure that the council isn't going to abuse its powers, and that's why this report comes to you.
Well, I do think, sorry, just to come back on that point, that you kindly provided members with a kind of a picture of what's been happening in respect of fly tipping. This does exercise the minds of many members of this committee and indeed many members of the council, and I think it would be helpful to have a regular item reported here about that particular issue, so that members are reassured, officers, and it sounds to me as though with the number of prosecutions there have been, officers are taking it seriously, but also kind of a report that deals with the number of cases. I mean, if it has been in Merton, let's hear about it in a report, and if it's been in the local media, let's hear about it, so that when John is accosted on his way home from Mass, he can say, oh, well, I'm glad you asked me that question because, and then trot out the answer provided by a report on a regular basis. Caroline?
In the summer edition of My Merton, it actually says that we have prosecuted 11 people. Each received fines of over £1,000 and a criminal record for large-scale prosecutions. And we have also issued 7,000 fixed penalty fines for dropping litter. So that's in My Merton. So for you to see and pass on then to people that we do prosecute and fine.
Could you send John a link to that so that when he's coming home from London, he's accosted, he can just go straight to the link and say,
On our website, that's quite easily.
Caroline, can I ask, does that actually name and shame people?
This doesn't, no.
Because this was a big issue at the last few meetings. The board brought it up. We all felt that people should be named and shamed. So I went away and looked, and in fairness, it doesn't actually end Wine Mountain in the summer. But before that, the only naming and shaming was, I think there's 2 PDFs from 2017 about prosecution. So obviously there's been some in between that, but otherwise, absolutely John would think that nothing has happened, or the public would think nothing has happened in between them. And we all felt, as the minutes show, that we all felt very strongly that people should be named and shamed on a regular basis for persistent fly tipping, which isn't the case actually.
can we take that back?
Absolutely.
We will take that back to the comms team. I can't they do press releases, you see, when we have successful prosecutions, which do name people. I suppose that's different from the council's website naming and shaming people, or my Merton indeed, which we can certainly take that back in terms of that, and the comms team can take that forward.
I think there's a strong view amongst Standards and General Purposes Committee that this does act as a deterrent and we should go forward with that. And I don't see anyone shaking their heads. I see quite a few people nodding their heads. So if you can, appropriate colleagues. Okay, can we note this report and then item 7. This complaints against members, so that's a
Thanks, Chair. Since the last meeting, I haven't received any new complaints in relation to members, which is excellent. I've got it's unusual as well. I work for other councils as well, and I have plenty of complaints at other councils, but at Merton we have, generally speaking, a very little complaints, which is good. The minutes on the previous meeting, I said that we had received a recommendation from the Ombudsman that a complaint from 2017 where the decision had been not to investigate, the Ombudsman considered it needed to be looked at afresh, and we needed to appoint an independent external monitoring officer to consider whether it needed to be investigated. That was concluded a few weeks ago with a report from the external investigator concluding that in his view it should not be formally investigated. And actually Clive Douglas, who sat by the side of me, is our second independent person that members may not have met before. Clive is part of the consideration of that. And that's been sent to the Ombudsman for the Ombudsman to consider whether or not any further action is required. That's the outcome of that action of the Ombudsman.
Clive, it's remiss of me not to welcome you. Would you like to add anything to what the board has had to say?
No, I don't think so. I had a good conversation with the external person. We had a detailed conversation, and I'm happy with the outcome. It was my conclusion that no further investigation was appropriate.
Thank you. Please accept my apologies for the
Thank you.
beginning of the meeting. Okay, that takes us on to agenda item 8, which is the forward work plan, and it's set out there. And I commend it to you, and can we note that?
Thanks, Joe. Just during the meeting, actually, in terms of the point raised about whistleblowing, we used to bring a monitoring report to this committee periodically on the whistleblowing policy, which I can't see in the thing. That might be that Margaret.
I find the refresh of the policy and then the actual cases I include in the annual report.
Okay.
My annual report. I go to a separate one unless you.
Any views? If you're happy that it's in the annual report, there is an opportunity at that stage to ask specific questions on that section. So, okay, right, well done. It is before 8 o'clock, and you can all take the rest of the evening off. Thank you for your contributions.